Canada just made a move that redraws the map of North American power. While Donald Trump spends another week battling corporate backlash over tariffs and economic uncertainty, Mark Carney has quietly delivered one of the most consequential breakthroughs in decades, a pathway for Canada to ship its energy directly to Asia without relying on the United States. A new Pacific pipeline, a united business sector, and a national strategy that blends AI with energy. This is Canada stepping out of America's shadow, and Washington knows it.
Pen finally to paper. A long-rumored memorandum of understanding was officially signed Thursday. Most notably, it'll open the door to a new crude pipeline from northern Alberta to the Pacific.
Today is a great day for the people of Alberta and for all of Canada.
The idea is to eventually move at least 1 million additional barrels of oil a day.
The announcement came in Calgary, where Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith signed a memorandum of understanding that lays the foundations for a new pipeline from northern Alberta to the British Columbia coast. For the first time in a generation, Canada is preparing to build an export corridor aimed not at the U.S. market, but at Japan, South Korea, India, and the rapidly growing economies across Asia. Reporting from Reuters confirmed that the project could eventually move up to 1 million barrels of oil per day, instantly transforming Canada's position in global energy markets. The political atmosphere around the signing was just as remarkable. Carney walked into a luncheon of more than 1,000 business leaders and received a standing ovation. Even AP News noted how unusual that moment was for a Liberal Prime Minister in the heart of Canada's oil country. The agreement doesn't just open a path to the Pacific, it reshapes federal and provincial responsibilities. Ottawa agreed to freeze its emissions cap for the oil and gas sector, adjust the tanker ban on BC's northern coast, and suspend clean electricity rules that Alberta said were blocking investment. Alberta, in return, signed on to expand industrial carbon pricing and fund a major carbon capture system known as Pathways Alliance. And in a surprise move that signals where Canada is heading, Alberta committed to building thousands of megawatts of AI computing capacity, aligning perfectly with Carney's ambition to make Canada an AI superpower powered by clean energy. This is not one deal, it is a blueprint for a new economic model.
Canada's pivot toward Asia is more than a strategic adjustment. It represents the end of a long-standing vulnerability. For decades, America acted as the bottleneck through which Canadian crude was forced to flow. Pipelines ran south, refineries were built south. Pricing power and political leverage sat firmly in U.S. hands. Trump leaned heavily on this imbalance. His tariff threats worked because Ottawa had nowhere else to send its oil. The lack of alternatives boxed Canada into a one-market reality. A Pacific corridor changes that reality entirely. By opening the door to a diverse set of Asian buyers, Canada can negotiate from strength rather than fear. The dynamic between Ottawa and Washington becomes more balanced. Instead of being a junior partner in continental energy politics, Canada positions itself as a global supplier capable of serving multiple regions. Trump's ability to use energy as a political weapon is weakened the moment Canada gains another outlet.
This is where the psychological shift emerges, and it is one of the most important elements of this pivot. For decades, Canadian policymakers operated under the assumption that geography locked the country into a one-way relationship with the United States. That assumption shaped trade, diplomacy, and even national identity. By targeting Japan, South Korea, India, and emerging Southeast Asian markets, Canada steps into a global arena it long hesitated to claim. This isn't just diversification, it is a statement of maturity. It signals that Canada is ready to compete on equal footing for global demand. This new confidence will shape investment decisions, inspire long-term partnerships, and create opportunities that were unimaginable when the U.S. controlled every negotiation point. With Asia in play, Canada's leverage increases, the U.S. loses strategic grip, and the continent's power balance shifts in ways Washington can no longer fully control.
But this realignment isn't happening only in energy. Carney's insistence on weaving AI infrastructure into the agreement reveals a broader strategy. AI requires enormous amounts of power. Alberta's resource base, combined with Canada's clean grid and supportive federal incentives, gives Canada a unique position. While Trump's America faces grid challenges, rising hardware costs from renewed tariffs, and tech sector frustration over immigration limits, Canada is constructing a model where energy supports AI supports industrial growth, and industrial growth supports export diversification. This integrated model is not just an economic plan, it is a competitive advantage. By pairing abundant energy with predictable policy, Canada offers the stability that global tech investors crave. In contrast, the U.S. is stuck in short-term political cycles that constantly disrupt long-range planning. This gap will only widen as AI demands accelerate worldwide. It is a cycle the U.S. cannot replicate easily because its internal politics have become too fractured to sustain long-term planning.
Carney's reception in Calgary underscores this contrast. In Canada, business leaders are rallying behind a government that offers clarity and direction. In the U.S., major sectors are increasingly alarmed. Manufacturers warn that Trump's tariff strategy is raising costs and undermining competitiveness. Tech firms object to restrictions that make talent harder to recruit. Farmers are suffering as China, India, and others shift purchases to Brazil and Argentina in response to U.S. policy unpredictability. Even traditionally conservative business coalitions are openly expressing frustration with Washington. The domestic atmospheres in the two countries are diverging: stability in Canada, turbulence in the United States. For global investors, that contrast matters.
It matters even more for geopolitics. America's historical leverage over Canada depended heavily on being the dominant buyer of Canadian crude. If Asian refiners begin securing long-term contracts, and early signals indicate they will, then U.S. refiners lose their privileged position. Canada becomes a supplier with options, not a captive exporter. And once that happens, Washington's traditional pressure points begin to disappear. This shift does not isolate Canada from the United States. It liberates Canada from being defined by it. Instead of reacting to American decisions, Canada is shaping its own economic future and building partnerships that align with a global, not continental vision.
Canada has entered a new phase, one defined by confidence, diversification, and strategic independence. By opening direct access to Asia, resetting federal regulations, and tying AI development to industrial growth, Carney is building an economy that can thrive no matter who governs in Washington. Trump, meanwhile, is learning the limits of America's influence in a world that no longer revolves around a single superpower. As Canada moves toward Asia, strengthens its business alliances, and embraces a unified national energy AI strategy, the old assumptions about North American power are breaking apart. The real question now is whether the United States can adapt to this new environment, or whether Canada's pivot marks the beginning of a geopolitical shift that Washington never saw coming.
Donald Trump says he doesn't want to see you at all at APEC. Has the Canadian government given any consideration to the possibility that he doesn't want to negotiate, and do you have a contingency plan for that?
We have yes. The short answer is yes.
Mark Carney didn't raise his voice or strike back. Standing before reporters in Kuala Lumpur, the Canadian Prime Minister responded to Donald Trump's latest outburst with quiet precision.
Obvious plan that is there in plain sight and will be further detailed in the budget on November 4th. And we have been saying this for months. I said this before I was elected. Emphasize the importance of us giving ourselves far more than any foreign government could take away, whatever the trading environment. And that's to build at home and to build strong at home.
Trump had just halted all trade talks with Canada after an Ontario television ad mocked his tariff policy. While Washington erupted in anger, Carney answered with a steady message. Canada would stay focused, build at home, and strengthen its global partnerships.
It was a moment of contrast, emotion against restraint, reaction against reason. For Trump, the dispute was personal. For Carney, it was structural. He framed the pause in negotiations not as a loss, but as a reminder that leadership is measured by composure, not noise. That calm reply didn't just defuse confrontation, it marked the start of a larger shift, turning an American tantrum into an opening for Canadian independence.
Carney's team had been close to a breakthrough. Officials on both sides were exchanging draft agreements aimed at easing U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Then, just as progress appeared within reach, the Ontario ad went on air across American networks. Trump reacted instantly. Negotiations were suspended and another 10% tariff on Canadian goods was threatened. He made no secret of his anger. Reporters asked Carney if he blamed Ontario's Premier Doug Ford for the setback. The Prime Minister didn't take the bait. Instead, he reminded the press that big negotiations often take unexpected turns, and that losing one round doesn't mean losing the game. His tone was deliberate, the opposite of Trump's. Where the U.S. president turned emotional, Carney turned strategic. By staying calm, he was signaling to both Washington and the Canadian public that Ottawa would not be dragged into a shouting match. Behind that calm surface, something larger was already taking shape. Canada was beginning to redefine how it would deal with the world.
During his media appearance, Carney repeated a phrase that summed up his entire economic vision. Canada must give itself more than any foreign government could ever take away. It was more than political reassurance, it was the outline of a national strategy, a plan to rebuild Canada's industrial base and shield it from unpredictable trade shocks. Carney revealed that his government would soon unleash hundreds of billions of dollars of investment at home, with details to be presented in the federal budget on November 4. This was not rhetoric, it was a clear signal that Canada would respond to trade aggression not with retaliation, but with reconstruction. In practice, this meant new funds for manufacturing, technology, and energy projects designed to make Canadian supply chains self-sufficient. Ottawa's approach contrasted sharply with Washington's. Trump used tariffs to punish competitors. Carney used investment to strengthen domestic capacity. The symbolism mattered. The U.S. tried to close doors. Canada began building its own foundation. What looked like an economic setback became the start of a national reset.
Carney's speech also revealed how deeply he understands the structure of North American trade. At one point, he pointed to aluminum, a product few outside the industry pay attention to, yet central to U.S. manufacturing. Canada supplies about 60% of the aluminum used by American factories. That metal is produced mostly using clean hydroelectric power from Quebec, which Carney said carries the energy equivalent of 10 Hoover dams. In other words, the U.S. benefits enormously by importing aluminum from Canada rather than producing it with its own fossil fuel electricity. By cutting off that supply, Trump's tariffs risk raising costs for American automakers, airplane builders, and construction companies, all industries that depend on Canadian inputs. Carney's point was clear. The U.S. and Canada are not rivals in this equation, they are two sides of the same industrial system. By targeting Canada, Trump was in effect taxing his own supply chain. This quiet economic logic cut deeper than any political statement could. It showed that leadership isn't about volume or emotion. It's about understanding how the system really works and knowing when to let the numbers speak for themselves.
As tensions with Washington rose, Carney's focus shifted eastward. In Kuala Lumpur, he met Malaysia's Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, his fourth ASEAN leader in just a few days. From there, he moved on to Singapore for meetings with business leaders before heading to South Korea for the APEC summit. While Trump was threatening new tariffs on allies, Carney was welcomed across Asia as a partner who valued stability.
At the ASEAN summit, he announced that Canada aims to increase non-US exports by 50% over the next decade, about $300 billion as part of its Indo-Pacific plan. He also confirmed a meeting with China's President Xi Jinping at APEC, the first between the two countries' leaders in 3 years. The talks would cover trade, technology, and the global economic system. Each stop sent the same signal. Canada is no longer waiting for Washington's approval. While the U.S. builds walls, Ottawa builds bridges, and much of Asia is ready to meet halfway. By the time Carney wrapped up his press events in Asia, the message had become unmistakable. Trump's trade war, once meant to project American strength, had instead weakened the country's leverage among its closest allies. For Canada, the fallout became an opening. Trump's anger gave Carney the space to present a different kind of leadership, one that combined patience with purpose. By focusing on long-term strategy rather than short-term politics, Canada began to emerge not as a victim of tariffs, but as a model of economic composure. Analysts noted the irony. The U.S. tried to isolate Canada through tariffs, yet ended up isolating itself as Canada deepened ties with Asia and Europe. American firms still rely on Canadian energy, aluminum, and technology components, meaning any prolonged tariff fight hurts U.S. producers first. Carney reminded Canadians that progress had been made, that the door remained open, and that the best response to economic pressure was national resilience. The trade war revealed two opposing philosophies of power. One relies on anger and control, the other builds through stability and quiet confidence. When Trump halted talks, many thought it was a setback for Canada. Weeks later, it proved the opposite. Canada had turned crisis into strategy, using patience as leverage and composure as strength. The lesson is simple. When a trade war becomes a test of leadership, it is not the loudest voice that wins. It is the one that keeps building, even when others walk away.
When it comes to trade relations, the future of the North American economy is at stake.
I am optimistic about the future because I look at the past.
Canadians staying home, that's their business. If you want to ban American alcohol, that's fine. There are reasons why the president and some of his team refer to Canada as being mean and nasty to deal with.
When the American ambassador lashes out at Canada, does it reveal U.S. frustration or Canadian resilience? That question surfaced after Pete Hoekstra, speaking in Halifax, dismissed Ottawa's Elbows Up campaign as anti-American. His criticism was meant as a warning, yet many Canadians interpreted it as proof that their pushback is being felt in Washington. Far from backing down, people across the country felt encouraged to stand taller, to buy Canadian goods, and to view the dispute as a chance to show unity. What was framed as an insult ended up reinforcing confidence that Canada's defensive stance is not only necessary, but effective.
The spark for this moment lies in Washington's tariff strategy. Under President Trump's second term, reciprocal tariffs have been rolled out aggressively. In March 2025, the White House imposed a 25% duty on imported cars and auto parts under Section 232. By July, a 50% tariff on copper was added, alongside restrictions on high-grade scrap copper. Steel and aluminum remain under heavy duties as well. The Department of Commerce itself confirmed that these sectoral tariffs are designed to expand beyond metals, and Canadian producers have been bracing for the next wave. What this has created is not compliance, but uncertainty. Business leaders in both countries point to the same reality. Investments stall when duties appear and disappear at a president's discretion. For Canadians, the lesson is clear. Trump's strategy has not weakened their resolve. Instead, it has driven consumers to buy Canadian, reinforced a culture of resilience, and made clear that reliance on American goodwill is a risk too great to ignore.
The Prime Minister kicked it off by traveling to Mexico last week for a summit without America. Mark Carney and his Mexican counterpart, Claudia Sheinbaum, signed an agreement aimed at deepening trade and investment between the two countries.
That realization explains why Prime Minister Mark Carney moved quickly to deepen ties with Mexico. Just days before Halifax, Carney met President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City and signed a bilateral agreement on trade and investment. This was no symbolic gesture.
It was the first step in repositioning Canada inside North America's supply chain ahead of the 2026 review of the Trade Pact. By linking arms with Mexico, Canada shows that it can look beyond Washington. The Trudeau years often left Canada reacting to U.S. policy, but Carney is signaling a different path. Mexico offers a growing market for Canadian agriculture, energy, and manufacturing inputs. More importantly, this partnership sends a message to Washington that Ottawa is not negotiating alone. It also reassures Canadian businesses that the government is actively seeking stability. For farmers worried about canola exports or for auto suppliers nervous about new tariffs, the Mexico deal represents a lifeline. It does not erase the challenges of U.S. duties, but it creates an environment where Canadian producers can plan with greater confidence, knowing alternative channels are being built. Canada is searching out options in Europe, in Asia, and even cautiously in China, but Mexico is the most immediate and powerful lever. It transforms American pressure into an opportunity to rewire continental trade flows.
The review of the USMCA, or CUSMA in Canada, will not erase the agreement. Few expect it to disappear. What is far more likely is a tightening of rules of origin, making it harder for Canadian products to qualify for duty-free access. That prospect is serious, yet it does not erase the shift we are witnessing now. American frustration, voiced bluntly in Halifax, has not intimidated Canadians. Instead, it has accelerated their search for partners and renewed their confidence in standing firm. Tariffs that were meant to corner Canada have united its consumers, its industries, and its leaders. Trump may say he loves tariffs, but the more he leans on them, the more Canada looks outward and discovers new strength. If Washington's disappointment is what fuels Canadian pride, then the balance of advantage in North America is already beginning to tilt in a new direction.